Welcome back. Now, you may remember from last week that we covered off the benefits of friends, but we're going to start with this discussion question today. How is having friends good for you? In what ways do they benefit you? You may have some ideas that we didn't even cover last week. We finished off last week with an assessment that was looking at six different areas that people can have where they benefit from relying on other people, and looking at whether there are people who can rely on us in those areas as well. And I hope that you have answers. You filled out all 12 kind of spots on your own. But if you find yourself in the spot where you recognize that there are some gaps, I have some good news for you. They can be developed. They can be grown and developed over time. But if you ask any farmer, it can be tough to grow things. And that's true even of great things like food and friendship. It can take a little bit of work. Actually, that's a great question to discuss. Here's your discussion question. What are some of the biggest obstacles to building a community? One of the big obstacles that I've seen is inertia. It's just easier to keep doing what we're doing, to keep on surviving, to keep on working, to keep on sucking it up and toughing it out. And you keep on shopping and keep up with the busy things of life. Sometimes an obstacle is you've got some close connections and you don't have room for the casual connections, or it makes it tougher with the consistent ones, or sometimes it's having so many casual connections that you aren't able to invest in the close ones. A third obstacle is harm. People can be terrible. We can act selfishly. We can hurt others. Just like we have the ability to do incredibly selfless things, just like we can choose to care for others, to encourage and build others up, or be generous so that others can experience care, in the same way we can also choose to take from others and do harm to others too. We have an incredible capacity for good, and we have an incredible capacity for harm, or for what the Bible calls evil. Now this does all go back to Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they became aware that they had done the wrong thing, because they ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge, the awareness of good and evil. And so God asks Adam, "Did you eat from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" In Adam's answer, we start to see the first break in community between people. Because Adam says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." Isn't that just so typical? Someone does the wrong thing, gets found out, and immediately blames someone else. Adam replies, "You know what? It's her fault. She gave it to me. In fact, it's kind of your fault, because you put her here with me. I was fine naming animals and stuff, but then you made her, and so yes, I did eat the fruit." And it gets worse from there. As we continue through Genesis, we see that God has a conversation with Adam and Eve's son Cain in Genesis chapter 4, verse 6 to 7. And God makes this statement to Cain. "But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now, this is, by the way, the first reference to the concept or idea of sin in the Bible. I wouldn't want to be famous for that. But instead of ruling over the sin and not giving into it, Cain kills his brother Abel. Noah's dad and Cain's great-great-great-grandson, named Lamech, he actually brags about murdering 2 people and threatens more. Everything spirals out of control. And so God starts over with Noah after the flood, where things continue to go off the rails. If there is a way to break community, you will probably find it done by someone in the pages of the Bible. Now, this is the quick version. There's even more stories in the Bible. But let's put yourself in sort of, use your imagination for this discussion question. What laws would you give to people if God asks you to write them? It's kind of fun thinking about the laws and thinking about the spot that God was in and what he was doing. Now, I know not everybody likes laws. I dislike unnecessary laws, like when a back road has a speed limit set at 50 kilometers and I think it should be 80 kilometers an hour, or speeding cameras. But I am very grateful for other laws, like laws against theft, murder, or reckless driving. And God is so concerned with community, with how we treat each other, that he gives laws. He defines sin. And some of these are positive laws. And positive laws carry the idea of do this or that. And then other laws are negative laws, and the idea that they say don't do this or that. And we actually even see that in the 10 Commandments, in the Big Ten. Honor your father and mother, don't steal. But there are a lot of other commands or laws in the first 5 books beyond the 10 Commandments. There are some Jewish scholars who believe that in the first 5 books of the Bible, there are something like 613 laws. That's a lot of laws. But when we take a look at those laws, we start to see some really important things. There are laws that say something like, return a lost item, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor, love God, that sort of things. There are other laws that say things like, don't rob, don't covet, don't move land markers, don't gossip, don't bear a grudge. Well, we know that, but what does this have to do with community? Everything. It's just hard to see because it's like looking at a negative space. It's like this picture of a tree. Now, you know that this is not a picture of a tree, but it is a picture of branches revealing an absence in the shape of a tree. So when we take a look at the Bible, we take a look at these commands, we see community all over the Bible. It's just we don't always see it because it's hiding in plain sight. It's like missing the tree for the branches. It's hiding in the negative space. God cares so much about community that he gave 613 laws in just the first 5 books of the Bible. And in there are so many that help set the boundaries for the community of Israel. And then he continued to send prophets, men and women, to call people away from sinning and back to following the laws. We tend to think of sin as a religious or spiritual problem, as something that needs to be sorted out by Jesus' death on the cross. And it is, and it does. But because of that tendency to think that way, to think of sin as a religious term, we miss that sin has a community problem as well, that it can also cause harm against someone else. So it's worthwhile to flip the commands around and start to imagine what would happen if people followed the laws, the rules, or the commands. To start to imagine if there was a community where people did what God was asking them to do and what that community would look like. Imagine the type of community that would happen if no one robbed anyone. The doors would be unlocked. If you dropped a wallet, you'd get it back because they have your address. That sounds like a pretty amazing community. And in fact, when they talk about the greatest countries in the world to live, if you lose your wallet, the likelihood of you getting it back is one of the markers for how good of a country that country is. By the way, this is the same thing for a community that doesn't covet. It would be amazing to know that no one is jealous, that no one is backbiting, that there's no issues, that when something good happens, they're celebrating the good that happened in your life. Imagine a community that doesn't lie or bear a false witness, that no person has to be worried about being falsely accused, or about a community that doesn't bear a grudge. That sounds like a pretty amazing community. Now, unfortunately, in the history of the world, no community has actually done it. And part of the reason is because Romans 3:23 tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The thing is, there's a problem with law as well. Paul wrote it to the church in Rome, in Romans chapter 4, verse 15. It says, "For the law brings about wrath." The law brings about wrath. The law can only punish when somebody breaks it. It can't empower somebody to fulfill it. We need something more than law. In Romans chapter 7, verse 7, Paul says this, "What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I wouldn't have known what coveting really was if the law hadn't said, 'You shall not covet.'" Sometimes being told no only gives you the idea to try something. That's basically what Paul is writing here. So the law, which is good and is for good, can only punish rather than inspire and empower. And it has the added drawback of informing us what sin is. Almost like it's a checklist. Did that, did that. We need something different than the law. We need help. Paul continues in Romans 8, verse 3. He says, "For what the law was powerless to do, God did by sending His own Son." So this is great news. The law was powerless to help us. It could only condemn us. But because Jesus came to earth, because He died on the cross and rose again on the third day, we have help. That's pretty amazing. It's tempting to think that all the commandments that God gave us happened before Jesus. But actually, there's a whole bunch of commands in the New Testament too, and we have Jesus' help to fulfill them. Now these commands, they look a little different because they're the positive ones, because Jesus is the one who's inspiring us and encouraging us and enabling us to fulfill them. Here are some of the ones that Jesus is helping us to do. In 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 11, "Therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you also are doing." 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 18, "Therefore comfort one another," with these words. You can look those up. 1 Peter 5, verse 5, "Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another." But Romans 15, verse 7, "Therefore accept one another, just as Christ also accepted us for the glory of God." Romans 12, verse 10, "Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor." Galatians 5, verse 13, "Serve one another through love." 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 15, "Always seek what is good for one another and for all people." 1 Peter 4, verse 9, "Be hospitable to one another without complaint." Ephesians 4, verse 32, be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ has also forgiven you. Galatians 6, verse 2, bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. 1 John 3, verse 11, we are to love one another. Man, imagine what a community that carries this out, what that community looks like. And we're empowered to do this. Paul gives us great news. It's not up to us to do it on our own like the law before Jesus. We have help. After all, Paul wrote in Romans 8:3, for what the law was powerless to do, God did by sending his own Son. And then he continues in Romans 8, verse 11, and he says, and if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Now that's a pretty amazing promise. We have help. Jesus fulfilled the law. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And God's Spirit is at work in our lives, helping us live it out. God really cares about helping us live in community. And this is great news, because it means that when we find ourselves at our limits, when there is tension, when there is disagreement, when we are stretched, God is helping and will help us, because community matters a lot to God. Community has mattered to God from garden to city, from Genesis to Revelation, before Jesus, through Jesus, and today and forever.